My mom tore up my medical records in the hospital lobby, screaming, "You're letting your sister die." My dad stood there, stone-faced, and called me a selfish mistake. They dragged me into that building to give away half my liver like I was property, not a person. And then the doctor looked at us and said 6 words that made my mom collapse in her chair. "My name is Evan Cole, and this is the story I never thought I'd have to tell out loud. But before I share it with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just drop a hi in the comments or tell me where you're from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now here's everything. If this story touches you, please consider subscribing to this channel. It costs nothing, but it means the world to me, and it helps make sure stories like mine, the ones people tried to bury, can finally be heard." The glass walls of the oncology lobby reflected the Gallatin Range in the distance, cold and sharp against a sky that felt too clear for what was about to happen. The clock above the check-in desk clicked over to 10:37. I remember the time because I decided that was when I would stop reacting on their terms. The air was thin, mechanical, the hum of a printer, the beep of ID cards, the slow drag of a gurney wheel against tile. And then came the crack of paper tearing louder than any machine. My mother Linda, in her navy blazer, held my medical records high like a script she had memorized for this very stage. She ripped the folder in half and screamed, "You're letting your sister die." Her voice carried across the lobby, landing on every bystander, the nurse pretending to organize forms, the mother clutching her child tighter, the guard turning his head but not moving. My father Frank stepped into her shadow, his voice calm as steel. "You're a selfish mistake." No raised pitch, no flare of anger, just fact delivered like a verdict. I stood in the center of it all, black jacket zipped to my throat, arms tight around what was left of my paperwork. I didn't scream back. I crouched instead, gathering the shreds they had scattered across the polished floor. Titles, codes, half-legal lines, proof more valuable than any protest. Linda lowered her volume, suddenly leaning closer so the crowd might think she was pleading. "I didn't raise you to be this cold," she whispered. I looked up into her eyes and said, steady, "You gave me only what you thought I owed you for." Her blink was the first crack in the performance. Frank moved closer, a wall of presence without touching me. "A selfish mistake," he repeated, and I shifted back half a step. Not retreat, just boundary. Around us, the air thickened, strangers waiting for me to either break or beg. Instead, I turned from them, walked straight to the nurse's station, and asked for a printed visitor policy. My voice didn't shake in the process for requesting a patient advocate, please. The nurse's eyes widened for a second. Then she slid the forms across the desk. Paper trail begun. Through the glass of room 408. Amber watched from her bed. Kimmo had softened her face, but her gaze was as sharp as it had ever been. She didn't mouth words, didn't need to. The slight curl of her lips said enough. "I'm still the center. You're still orbiting." My chest tightened, not with pity but with recognition. This was never about saving her life. It was about proving they still owned mine. By the time I tucked the policy sheet into my folder, my heart had steadied. Linda was already shifting back into martyr silence. Frank folding into his own shadow. They wanted a scene. I gave them documentation, and when I walked toward the side hall, papers under my arm, I knew what 1037 meant. Not surrender, not silence. It was the moment I turned their stage into my record. Back in Bozeman, Montana, my rented studio apartment smelled faintly of coffee grounds and printer ink. The Bridger Mountains loomed beyond the window-sharp angles against a dimming sky. I set my laptop on the wooden desk, turned on the brass lamp, and opened the inbox I had been avoiding for months. There it was. United Donor Network Confidential. November 2nd, test completed. November 7th, results received. Bold letters across the PDF. Not compatible. I had tested before anyone asked me to, hoping the outcome might close the question before guilt was weaponized. I forwarded the email immediately. Dr. Harris, my lawyer, Aaron Walsh. CCC myself. Subject line reconfirming non-compatibility for record. My cursor lingered before clicking send, but my hand was steady. I opened the Notes app, typed a timeline. November 2nd test, November 7th result. United Donor Network contacted. Emergency contact, Linda Cole. I wrote each step as if carving into stone. If they ever claimed refusal, the dates would speak louder than their accusations. A new email pinged. Sender Natalie Torres, a name I hadn't seen in 12 years. She had left town the summer before senior year. The only person who ever looked at what happened in our house and didn't look away. Her message was short. I kept these, thought they might matter. 3 attachments loaded. The first, her lined notebook page written in shaky teenage handwriting. Evan after the stairs. Except now it was me, Evan, and her description of that day. The thud, the scream, the way Amber smiled when she called for Mom. The second, a Polaroid faded but clear bruise across ribs, date in 056-2010. The third, a folded note, my handwriting from years ago. If anything happens again and I'm not at school, can you tell Mrs. Carter, please? I stared until my eyes blurred. Not tears, just the weight of being seen after years of erasure. They had painted me as dramatic, fragile, a liar. And here were the receipts, images, ink witnesses. I opened voice memos, pressed record phone, balanced on my knee. My voice sounded foreign at first. They said I was dramatic, that I lied. But the truth is, I stayed silent too long. Silence isn't weakness. It's just bruises that fade while lies stay. I stopped, saved the file as Statement Draft 1, and sat in the dim glow of the lamp. Notifications stacked on my phone. Linda's number lighting up again and again. I didn't open them. Instead, I drafted another email attaching the timeline and files. If they claim refusal, I typed, "See attached, tested November 2nd. Notified November 7th, never compatible." They knew they lied. I hit save, not send. For now, documentation was enough. In the quiet of that apartment, I realized something. I no longer needed their approval, their audience, or their forgiveness. I had paper dates, voices, photographs, and in a world that believed only what could be filed, stamped, and notarized, I finally had something they couldn't perform away. Receipts. Dr. Harris's office smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper toner. 2 monitors glowed against the pale wall, a printer humming in the corner. He swiveled the screen toward me. Registry logs appeared in neat rows, the kind of cold data no one could twist. Highlighted in yellow recipient, 8 months ago, Linda Cole. The system had recorded it. My mother had received the donor match results long before today. She had known I wasn't compatible from the start. My stomach stayed still, even as my pulse quickened. He clicked again and brought up another file. A scanned medical power of attorney dated 5 weeks ago. My name typed clean across the header. My signature sprawled at the bottom, except it wasn't mine. The E in Evan was closed too tightly. The C in Cole slanted left instead of right. It was a forgery crude enough to stand out to anyone who compared it with the signature on my intake forms. "I need this printed," I said. My voice didn't rise. Stamped, signed by whoever handles authentication with a timestamp and the ID of the person who submitted it. Dr. Harris nodded, tapped a few keys, and the printer spat out the pages one by one. He slid them into a manila folder and handed it to me. The seal of the hospital pressed into the corner like a brand. In the hallway, fluorescent light washed over tile floors. Nurses moving past with clipboards and IV poles. I opened my phone and drafted an email. Withheld test result and forged POA immediate review, requested attachments, registry log, stamped copy of the POA my ID comparison. Recipient's Ethics Board Hospital Legal CC Aaron Walsh. Within seconds, the auto reply arrived in my inbox. Your submission has been received. Documentation secured. I hadn't even put the phone away before Linda and Frank appeared at the end of the hall. Linda carried a clipboard stacked with forms, her expression tight with fury and theater. She shoved it toward me. "Sign it. Do the right thing." Frank loomed just behind her shoulders, squared like stone. I lowered my voice, angled toward him. "Touch me again and I'll call security. I'll file this incident in writing." His eyes flickered, but he didn't move. Linda's hand trembled as she pressed the board closer. A nurse walking past slowed her eyes on me. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," she said softly. "Even if they scream." That sentence landed heavier than any yell. I stepped back, folded her firm under my arm, and walked away without signing a thing. Behind me, I could hear Linda's voice rising Frank's low rumble, trying to contain it. But the hallway swallowed their performance. And what I carried with me wasn't just paper. It was proof they had crossed from manipulation into fraud. As I passed the media wing on my way out, I caught sight of staff setting up a banner across the podium. Community Appreciation Ceremony. Cameras being tested, chairs lined in rows, volunteers placing bottled water under each seat. I paused long enough to take it in. They weren't preparing to thank me. They were preparing to erase me. The auditorium in Helena, Montana gleamed under hospital white light. Rows of seats filled with staff in crisp coats, volunteers' families. At the front, a podium stood beneath a banner. Community Appreciation Ceremony. On the side wall, a massive screen projected Amber in her bed upstairs. Hair-thinned oxygen tube under her nose, her expression arranged into fragile grace. I stood against the wall near the exit folder, tucked close, watching as Linda walked onto the stage. She wore Navy again voice, drenched in sweetness that made the air feel sticky. "We are deeply grateful for the anonymous donor who saved our daughter," she said, pausing as if to steady tears that weren't there. Anonymous. That word cut sharper than any insult. Frank stepped forward, neck straight back and solemn. True strength is shown in silence. Families heal not by pointing fingers, but by holding one another. His tone was rehearsed to the same cadence he'd used when telling me I was a mistake. Now it was a sermon to an audience primed to applaud. The screen shifted to a close-up of Amber. She smiled, faintly the image of saintly suffering. To anyone else, it was inspiring. To me, it was ownership written across her face. She didn't have to speak. Her eyes told me the same thing they always had. I'm still the center. You're still orbiting. I pulled out my phone thumb, hovering over record. If they wanted to bury me, I would document their shovels. I lifted the camera toward the stage. In that instant, Linda descended from the podium, eyes locking on mine. Her hand shot out faster than I could brace and smacked the phone from my grip. It clattered onto the polished floor screen, cracking with a sound that silenced half the room. Gasps rippled. A volunteer froze mid-step. A guard moved forward. I crouched slowly, picked up the broken device pieces biting into my palm. I straightened, held it out toward the guard. "Please log this as evidence," I said. My voice carried clear, even unshaken. "This is destruction of personal property in front of witnesses." He hesitated, then nodded, pulling out a small notepad. Linda's chest heaved, but her mask was slipping. The audience that had once clapped for her speeches now stared wide-eyed, unsure where the script had gone wrong. I tucked the damaged phone into my jacket. The files had already uploaded to cloud storage the moment recording began. No amount of shattered glass could erase that. As the ceremony stumbled forward, I walked toward the exit. The clapping resumed forced and thin, but it no longer reached me. In my head, one sentence repeated sharp and steady as my footsteps. "They think the microphone belongs to them, but I will be the one to hold it." The consultation room smelled faintly of lemon cleanser, a space meant to feel safe but incapable of holding what was about to detonate. A single lamp glowed above the wooden table. Dr. Harris sat across from me, two monitors angled to the side. Linda and Frank occupied the chairs nearest him, shoulders squared as if bracing for applause. On the screen to his right, Amber appeared on a secure call from her bed upstairs, her face framed by the pale blue wall of room 408. Dr. Harris flipped the file open as tone steady. "We reran everything twice. You are not biologically related." 6 words. They landed like a gavel striking wood. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Linda's face drained of color, her hand gripping the armrest until her knuckles blanched. Then she collapsed into her chair, the metal legs scraping across tile in a screech that made me wise. Frank's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. His eyes went flat like shutters drawn against light. I felt the tremor rise in my hand, but clamped it down against the folder in front of me. They were waiting for me to cry, to shatter, to prove their narrative. Instead, I leaned forward. "Print the full report. Stamp it. Sign it. I'll take the originals." Dr. Harris nodded and began clicking the printer in the corner, waking with a groan. On the monitor, Amber didn't flinch. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, almost imperceptible unless you'd lived your life reading her micro-expressions. It wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. She had known. She had always known. The folder slid toward me across the table, warm from fresh ink embossed with the hospital seal. I placed my hand on it like a pledge. Inside were copies of genetic results comparison charts in the registry confirmation, showing Linda had been the listed contact. It was all there proof not only of my non-compatibility, but of the years they had lied to keep me in place as a reserve organ, not a son. Linda's breathing quickened. Shallow gasps pulled through clenched teeth. Frank pressed a hand to her shoulder but still said nothing. I watched them steady, refusing to be dragged into their theater of collapse. I wasn't their mistake. I was their insurance policy, and the policy had just expired. When I rose from the chair folder in hand, my legs carried more weight than I expected. Out in the corridor, the hum of hospital life returned, the squeak of sneakers on tile, the shuffle of carts. But beneath it all, I could hear the faint murmur of reporters downstairs in the auditorium, their cameras still humming from the ceremony. I tightened my grip on the folder and whispered to myself, "Not for them, not for Dr. Harris, not for Amber, but for me. It's time I take the microphone." The auditorium lights were still blazing when I stepped into the side hallway that fed onto the stage. The banner from the morning's performance hung crooked now. Community Appreciation Ceremony, its fabric catching the glare of spotlights. Reporters lingered in clusters, shuffling papers, adjusting cameras, waiting for the next quote to drop. I stepped forward, folder under my arm, voice projecting before anyone could redirect me. "I only need a few minutes." The room stilled, heads turned, the spotlight followed. The podium was still live microphone blinking red. I walked up the steps, every echo of my shoes ricocheting off the walls. I set the folder on the stand and pulled out the first document. "This," I said, holding the stamped page high, "is the donor test result from November. It says clearly not compatible." Murmurs rippled. Camera shutters snapped. I laid the second sheet flat across the podium. "This is the registry log. It shows who received those results. Linda Cole, 8 months ago." She knew. The words tasted like steel. The third paper trembled only slightly between my fingers. "This is a power of attorney filed 5 weeks ago, carrying my name but not my signature. The handwriting doesn't match. It is forged." Gasps erupted, the sound swelling through the room like water breaking a dam. I drew in a breath, locking eyes with the nearest camera. I didn't refuse to donate. I was never eligible. They knew it, and they lied. Flash after flash lit up the stage. The reporters who had smiled at Linda earlier now leaned forward, pens scratching lenses fixed on me, I could feel the air change, the narrative shifting in real time. From the corner of my eye, the screen flickered to Amber's live feed again. She reclined in bed, her smile thin but present. Not panic, not shame. Just that same look of possession, as if even this unraveling belonged to her story. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't wait for shouts. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and stepped off the stage. The path cleared for me without a word, a current pulling me toward the exit. Behind me, voices rose, questions, accusations, demands. But I kept moving. My pulse pounded, but not from fear. It was rhythm. It was the beat of something inevitable. As the heavy doors of the auditorium swung shut behind me, I knew the retaliation was already being plotted. Linda would find her angle. Frank, his silence. Amber, her mask. But for the first time, the story was no longer theirs to control. The microphone had been mine, and the cameras had seen it. The night in Bozeman stretched long and thin, the air sharp through the open window of my studio. The Bridger Mountains loomed outside like black teeth against the dim sky. On the wooden table, under the yellow cone of a desk lamp, every page I'd carried, every stamped document, every photograph and log sprawled in careful order. I opened my laptop and began to write. Line by line, I shaped an affidavit, not just a statement, but a map of everything they had tried to bury. November 2nd, blood drawn. November 7th, results delivered. Not compatible. Registry log recipient, Linda Cole. 5 weeks ago, power of attorney forged in my name. February medical records torn up in a public lobby. March the 6 words in Dr. Harris' office. You are not biologically related. Each fact entered every date a nail in the frame of truth. I attached the evidence stamped copies, the cloud backup of the shattered phone recording the security guard's incident report, and my signed comparison of the fake signature. My cursor hovered over the address line, Ethics Board Hospital Legal, Aaron Walsh. Then I clicked send. The auto-reply came back almost instantly. Submission received. I printed a hard copy, slid it into a clear sleeve, and signed across the bottom in heavy ink. Evan Cole. No middle initial, no qualifiers. Just the name I had carried, and the one I intended to keep. The affidavit lay there like a flag planted not for them, but for me. It was nearly 2:45 in the morning when I finally leaned back, staring out the window at the dots of city light scattered across the foothills. My silence had once been a cage away to survive the constant accusations. Tonight, it was something else entirely. Silence was leverage. Silence was power. Every document I had sent would move through systems that couldn't be swayed by Linda's voice or Frank's glare. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was bracing against them. I felt like I was moving ahead of them. By the time the sun rose, the story would no longer belong to our house, our blood, or our grief. It would belong to the record. Tomorrow, the fight would not be private. It would stand in the light. The hospital garden was nearly empty by late afternoon. Wind scraped through the birch trees, scattering pale leaves across the stone path. I spotted Amber on a bench near the center, wrapped in a gray hoodie, her IV line trailing into a portable pump by her side. Her eyes tracked me before her mouth did, as if she had expected me. I stopped a few feet away. I didn't sit. My shadow stretched across the gravel toward her shoes. For a long beat, neither of us spoke. Then she broke it. "They didn't keep you for love," she said flatly. "They kept you because one day they might need you. I thought you always knew." The words cracked the air like a pane of glass. I felt my jaw lock before I could answer. "I didn't know," I said. My voice was low but steady, but I felt it every day. Her eyes flicked up at me, searching but without guilt. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "Good," I replied, because I'm not offering it. The wind cut between us, sharp enough to sting my ears. I shifted the folder in my arm, heavy with documents. I don't want revenge, Amber. I don't want apologies. I just want out. I want to stop orbiting around you. For once, she didn't smile. She looked away toward the birch leaves rattling against the hospital wall. I turned before the silence could harden into another form of control. My footsteps crunched against the gravel as I walked out of the garden. I didn't look back. Inside the corridors were quiet, the evening shift moving like shadows behind glass. I replayed her words in my head, not as wounds, but as proof. She had admitted it openly, what I had always suspected. I didn't need her to say more. I didn't need her blessing. As I stepped into the elevator, the folder pressed against my chest, a single sentence carried with me like armor. I don't need forgiveness. I only need freedom. The front page of the Billings Gazette glared back at me from Aaron Walsh's conference room screen. Adopted son forced toward liver donation. Forged medical documents under investigation. My name was in bold beneath it. Evan Cole. For years it had been the word they tried to erase. Now it was printed large enough for the entire city to read. Erin leaned back in her glass-walled office, the hum of downtown traffic muffled beyond. "It's out," she said simply, as if naming the obvious. I scrolled through article after article, each headline louder than the last. Bozeman Daily Chronicle Hospital under fire for ethics violations. Channel 4 News forged POA linked to Cole family. Even local blogs carried the story images from the podium flashing beneath. An email pinged. Subject line Ethics Board, immediate action. I clicked it open. My pulse steady. An internal investigation has been initiated. The forged POA has been transferred to legal. All relevant parties will be questioned under oath. The seal of the hospital sat at the bottom of the message, formal and inarguable. Erin glanced at me. "You created precedent. Once it's on record, it can't be spun away. They can't rewrite this anymore." Meanwhile, the fallout rippled through the family. Linda had checked herself into the very hospital she had tried to weaponize, citing stress and public pressure. Frank had gone silent, his absence louder than his lectures. Amber's social media, once curated with pity and prayers, went dark. No new photos, no statements, just silence. Out in the hall, photographers crowded the hospital entrance, their flashes bouncing off glass. For the first time, I didn't flinch. I looked straight through the office window and into their storm. The light no longer felt like a threat. It felt like exposure. Truth amplified. Later that afternoon, a courier delivered a white envelope directly to me. The paper inside was crisp, the stamp from Gallatin County District Court, heavy in the corner. At the top, in black print, the words I had carried and fought for. Legal confirmation of name, Evan Cole. I held it between my fingers, feeling its weight. For so long they had tried to convince me I was a mistake. Now the law itself said otherwise. I folded the paper carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and whispered under my breath, "This is the beginning of the end." The courthouse smelled of polished wood and ink, a place where things were written to last. That morning, I stood at the clerk's desk, pen in hand, signing the final confirmation. My name stretched across the line, Evan Cole. No hesitation, no alteration. The same name they once called worthless was now documented permanent mine. The clerk stamped the page, slid it into a file, and nodded. It was done. By afternoon, I found myself in Bozeman, Montana, at a small cafe tucked between bookstores. The Bridger Mountains cut into the horizon beyond the window, jagged and strong. I ordered black coffee, sat by the glass, and opened another envelope. Inside was a letter written in uneven handwriting. "I'm 16. I live in New Mexico. I saw your story online. My parents keep telling me I have to give up my kidney for my brother. I didn't know I could say no until I read about you. Thank you for proving it's possible." The words shook me more than any headline. My throat tightened not with grief, but with recognition. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my bag. It didn't belong in the folder of evidence. It belonged somewhere else. Back in my apartment that evening, I opened the drawer where I had once kept every receipt affidavit and photograph. I moved those into a labeled box marked Records and created a new drawer. Into it, I placed the letter along with the Polaroid Natalie Torres had saved, and the small scraps of paper that had once been pleased for help. This drawer I labeled Keepsakes. They were no longer ammunition. They were memory proof, not of war, but of survival. Sitting at the desk, I whispered to myself, it was never about revenge. It was about freedom. I don't need their forgiveness. I don't need to explain anymore. The silence that followed was warm, not heavy. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the mountains in gold and shadow. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone orbiting another person's gravity. I felt like a body in its own right, set on its own path. I closed the drawer gently. My name echoed in my head, steady and final. Evan Cole. Imperfect, unwanted, unrelated, and yet mine. Silence had once been my prison. Now it was my choice. And in that choice I found the only victory that mattered. I had defined myself. For weeks the noise had been constant reporters calling lawyers, circling strangers, sending me messages that felt both intimate and intrusive. When the court confirmation of my name arrived, I thought that was the final page. But stories never close as cleanly as files in a cabinet. Loose threads linger waiting to be tied. The first was the hospital itself. The investigation by the ethics board had named Linda, but the forged power of attorney hadn't appeared in a vacuum. A clerk had stamped it. A staff member had submitted it. In Aaron Walsh's office, under the glare of fluorescent light, I read the report again. A mid-level administrator had allowed the document through citing family urgency and prior relationships. Nepotism and negligence twisted together. My parents hadn't acted alone. They'd been enabled. I sat with Erin watching her red pen underlined sentence after sentence. "If you want closure," she said, "you'll need to decide. Pursue them all or let the system carry it." I thought of the nurse who'd whispered in the hallway that day telling me I didn't have to do anything against my will. I thought of the guard who had written up Linda's outburst. Not everyone in that place was complicit. Some had tried to protect me quietly. For their sake, I chose to let the system carry the rest. The second gap was Amber. She had confessed in the garden, but her silence afterward gnawed at me. Did she tell the truth because she wanted freedom too, or because she wanted the last word between us? One evening, walking past the hospital on my way home, I saw her window lit faintly against the dusk. I didn't go in. I didn't call. Some borders don't need crossing again. The truth she had spoken was enough. I wrote it down, signed the note, and filed it not as evidence, not as a keepsake, but as a closed chapter. The last hole was inside me. For so long, I had lived on alert. Every paper saved every word, recorded every silence, honed into armor. Freedom was harder than I expected. It meant waking up without checking my phone for threats. It meant eating breakfast without planning how to defend myself. It meant learning how to be someone beyond a case file. One night, back in my apartment, I pulled out the box labeled Records. I opened it, sifted through the stamped affidavit, the photographs, the printouts of registry logs. Each page carried weight, but no longer over me. I sealed the box shut with tape, wrote the date across the top, and slid it into the back of the closet. Then I opened the smaller drawer labeled Keepsakes and touched the letter from New Mexico, the Polaroid, the note from high school. That drawer stayed open, light breathing. When I finally stepped onto my balcony, the city spread out below. Billings at night shimmered with headlights and neon people moving in their own orbits. For the first time, I didn't feel like mine was broken. I had been their silence, their scapegoat, their insurance. Now I was simply myself. The gaps had been closed not by revenge, but by refusal to carry their weight any longer. The hospital would answer to the state. My parents would answer to their absence. My sister would answer to her own conscience, and me, I would no longer answer to any of them. I whispered into the dark as if leaving a final note to the void they once tried to trap me in. My name is Evan Cole. That is the whole story, and it is enough. When I look back at everything that happened, it's almost impossible to believe I lived through it. For years, I was told silence was survival. I was told family was unconditional, but in practice it was a contract written in invisible ink terms. I never agreed to expectations. I never had the chance to challenge. They tore up my records. They screamed at me. They called me a selfish mistake. They dragged me toward an operating room like I was nothing more than spare parts. And all the while, they already knew the truth. I could never have saved her. Not biologically, not medically. My body wasn't theirs to claim. And yet they tried anyway. The 6 words the doctor spoke, "You are not biologically related," were the sharpest cut, but also the cleanest. They severed the last tie that bound me to a life of guilt manipulation and control. My mother collapsed. My father froze. My sister smirked. And in that single moment I realized the cage had always been unlocked. I only needed the courage to step out. I didn't choose this story, but I chose what to do with it. I chose to gather receipts instead of raising my voice. I chose affidavit and timestamps over screaming matches. I chose to face the public humiliation and turn it into documented truth. Every signature, every log, every photograph became a weapon sharper than any insult hurled my way. And in the end, that's what saved me. Not revenge, not forgiveness, but clarity. If there's anything I want you to take from my journey, it's this: silence can be a shield, but it can also become a prison if you never decide to set it down. Speaking up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it's an email, forwarded a document, signed a voice memo, recorded in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's saying no and not explaining why. Your story doesn't need to be written in their handwriting. You are allowed to write your own. I know many of you listening might carry your own invisible scars. Maybe your family has used guilt as currency. Maybe you've been told you're a mistake, a burden, a disappointment. Maybe you felt the crushing weight of being erased by the very people who should have protected you. I need you to hear me when I say you are not alone. You are not a mistake. And you are not obligated to sacrifice yourself just to be loved. If my story resonates with you, let it be more than just entertainment. Let it be a reminder that boundaries are not betrayals, that documents truth and self-respect are stronger than manipulation, that you don't have to bleed to prove your worth. Before you go, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. It means more than you realize to know these words reach someone beyond this screen. Because connection, the real kind built on honesty, not control, is what makes the burden lighter. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Not just for me, but for the countless voices that deserve to be heard. Every click, every share, every small sign of support helps stories like mine break free from the silence that once suffocated us. When you subscribe, you're not just following a channel. You're joining a community where truth matters, where pain is acknowledged, and where healing is possible. My name is Evan Cole. That name is mine because I fought to keep it, not because it was handed to me. I don't need revenge. I don't even need forgiveness. What I needed and what I finally claimed was freedom. And now I can say with all the weight of lived experience behind it, freedom is worth every scar. So if you've ever been silenced, if you've ever felt erased, let my story be proof that you can step out of that shadow You can set down the guilt that was never yours to carry, and you can choose today to begin writing your story in your own words. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And most of all, thank you for reminding me that no matter how cruel the silence once was, when the truth finally speaks, it echoes farther than any lie ever.